Your Eyes. I am your host, Emily, and today we'll be talking about the media and third spaces as enrichment, as well as some other topics as well that I think would be interesting for us to delve into. Today, it's just going to be me. Our host, Anvi, unfortunately, is out sick today. So let's go ahead and get started with today's episode. Um, I have some notes, so if you guys see me looking at my phone, that's why. But I want to start with the importance of media as enrichment because I feel like all the times the media that we consume isn't always the most like beneficial to us, but I feel like there's so much media that's so thought provoking and not necessarily just educational, but also just fun to watch. Like it doesn't have to be anything super profound. It's just something that distracts you from, I guess, the mundane nature of everyday life, for a lack of better words. But yeah, I feel like so much of the media that we consume is so draining to consume. We see so much negativity in the media. Well, that's a little vague in the news. And a lot of the movies or just like general things that we see on social media sometimes aren't exactly the most uplifting, I guess, for lack of better words. But I feel like there's just so much media that is, I don't want to say enlightening because I feel like that sounds kind of pretentious, but that I feel like is very insightful. And not even just that, it's just like fun to consume. Like, in terms of movies, I'm trying to think of some movies that I really like that I think really just like sat with me and made me think for a really long time, not for a really long time, but that I kept revisiting internally. I think one movie that made a really, really big impression on me was The Eternal Sunshine of the Spotless Mind. That's one of my favorite movies of all time. I really love it. And I just like any movie that has some sort of allegory to take away from it. And I think the main idea with that particular movie is just that emotions aren't something that you can just erase or suppress, but something that you have to work through. And I think at its bare bones, it's that the only way out is through. And I feel like that is applicable to really anything in life. I don't think that there's any way to just remedy things by avoiding them because I think at the end of the day that does more harm than it does good. I think things tend to linger when you avoid them or suppress them. Maybe not in the most overt form, but I feel like it always kind of rears its head periodically. But I think when you actually take the time to feel what it is that you need to feel or process the things that you need to process, even if it's hard and you face a lot of ugly, I think really that's the only way that you can um, overcome that obstacle and actually come out a better person or actually be able to move past whatever situation you're in. I don't really think that ignoring things is always the way to go. But um, I really like that. And then I also really liked Her. I'm not sure if you guys have seen that with Joaquin Phoenix. I also thought that was really interesting. I think there's so much talk around AI, and we talk a lot about AI on the podcast. Like, there is really no doubt about it. I feel like that's something that comes up on the podcast with Envy and I so often. And I think just the implications of it in general are always so fascinating, and you can discuss it for hours and hours just because there's so much to consider. And I feel like some of the things that we think of AI aren't exactly outlandish, but like a little like out of grasp for us. And it's almost reminiscent of how people in the 30s, I'm not sure if you guys have ever seen, but sometimes people there are like these I see these like little posts where it'll be answers that people in the 30s gave when they asked them, "Oh, what technology do you think they're going to have in the future?" And they're like, "Oh, flying cars or we're going to inhabit Mars," which is ironic that I say that, but like things of that nature or things akin to that. I feel like whenever I think about people talking about the implications of AI, it's always reminiscent of that to me. Like that's the first thing that my brain connects it to. And I'm always like, I really wish that somehow I was like some omniscient being and I could look 200 or 300 years into the future and actually be able to see if any of this stuff came true or what the nature of humanity is. But yeah, I think that's something that I wish I could know. I feel like there's so many things I wish I could know, but that literally will not physically be able to live to see. But circling back to my main point, I really just like media like that because it's just so thought provoking. And I feel like sometimes it's just nice to have something that stimulates your mind, but it's also extremely cinematic in the same breath. Like, I really love A24, and the movie Waves, I feel like is super interesting, and after the protagonist, like, goes to jail well, prison, um, we follow his family and, like, the literal, like, waves that his actions have had on the people around him. I think seeing a movie filmed from that point of view where you think one person's the main character and then it completely shifts in the second half, I think that's so like, such a cool concept because I think so often we get caught up with fixating one person or a group of people in cinema, but I mean, that's just kind of like how it is. You kind of fixate through one point of view. You don't really tell stories from multiple point of views. I feel like it's kind of rare to see that, or just like one omniscient point of view. But it's really rare that you see it through like multiple people's lenses. And I think to see that on the big screen is really interesting because I think we all have a specific perception of how a movie is or what it's supposed to be or the setup. And it kind of reminds me of like main character syndrome, which is, I mean, I'm not sure how many of you guys are familiar with that, but it's basically like when somebody's very self-involved because they think that they're the main character. And every time I like see somebody who has that way of thinking, I just think about like movies and I'm like, huh, it's really interesting. But to see in a film, not a film, to see in a movie or a show that we have like multiple point of views, like we're seeing things from multiple angles and from different people's perspectives. I think that's so interesting because it shows how the same events can impact different people because not everybody internalizes things the same way. And I think that's really interesting. And then um another movie, there was one that was on the tip of my tongue that I thought was really interesting that I really, really like, but I'm trying to think because I know there's so many like A24 movies that I just absolutely adore. I also really liked Lady Bird. I think a lot of people I've seen critique it for being boring. I honestly loved it. I think a lot of people tend to dislike films that move, well, movies that move a little bit slower. I hate using the word films. I feel like that sounds like kind of pretentious sometimes, but I feel like a lot of people despise movies that move a little bit slower or that are paced a bit slower just because it's not super, I don't know how to describe it. It's not super in your face. It isn't super adrenaline evoking. And I don't know why. I've always really liked movies that are paced in that way that almost feel like you're living day to day with the character. I've always liked that because I feel like so much of the time, so many events are compressed into one singular movie, which is great when it's like a thriller or a drama or something. But when I feel like it's a coming of age movie, or anything akin to that, I really like when it's paced a little bit slower because I feel like it allows you to relate to the characters so much more because you actually feel like you're seeing somebody come of age. Like I know it's like in the name, but you're literally seeing somebody come of age. And I think seeing that in that pacing and being able to relate your personal day to day to their day to day in a way is it allows you to empathize with them a lot more, and it allows you to kind of apply what happens in the movie, like, to your, like, real life. And then another movie that I thought was really interesting was Call Me by Your Name with Timothy Chalamet. Like, the cinematography in that movie was so, so beautiful. I think that was one of the first movies I'd ever seen that genuinely made me want to go to Europe or make me, like, consider visiting. Just seeing the Italian countryside, it was just so beautiful, and I don't know, there's just something about it that was just so peaceful, but also really insightful in the same way, seeing the love story between the 2 protagonists and then, them not ending up together. I always think it's so interesting when directors choose not to have 2 characters end up together. Um, I think a lot of the times people kind of expect a happy ending in movies, and I remember I saw this one, I think it was some sort of quote or something that I saw a long time ago, and it was, like, something to the tone of people get really disappointed when there's not a happy ending in a movie because there's already so much grim and negative events in real life that it sucks to not even be able to have some sort of idyllic situation or outcome even in some fantastical world. It wasn't that verbatim, but that's like how I'm like trying to summarize it essentially. But I think that's a really interesting sentiment just because it's so, I feel like media is like an escape for a lot of people. And like I was saying before, I feel like media as enrichment is so important, and to be able to actually indulge in somebody else's creative pursuits and actually like see almost like pick their brain in a way. I feel like that's so interesting. I just love movies, and I'm like a huge film buff, and I love over analyzing things until I can't anymore. Um, but yeah, I like the idea of being able to almost see the world through the director's eyes, like because they're the ones who are kind of, well, literally directing every action and every word, I guess for lack of better words, that's happening on screen. So it's really interesting to be able to see their vision, their creative vision. And then also when things are left a little bit more ambiguous in movies as well, I feel like that's always very interesting because you can interpret it however you'd like. And I love watching like movie analyses because I feel like it's so fun to be able to just see the different perspectives that people have, as well as sometimes having insight on what it is the director was trying to portray as well. I think it almost like allows, at least me personally, to like foster a sense of empathy, like a deeper sense of empathy for other people, which I know is like maybe me looking too deeply into it, but I don't know, that's just how I internalize it. But I think it allows us to, when we actually like watch movies and like try to understand what exactly is like trying to be portrayed, I think it almost allows us to develop a deeper sense of empathy with the director, because it's like we're actually actively putting ourselves in somebody else's shoes and like seeing things through somebody else's perspective, aka the directors. And I think having that as a form of enrichment, or actually being able to like pick apart different movies or shows, I think that is a pretty cool thing to be able to do. And there's so many communities around it. Like I know like there's people in so many different types of like fandoms or like movie series or like comic book series or like movie series. Like I mean, we all know the huge classics. We all know Harry Potter, we all know Twilight, we all know Divergent. Like these are all like so, the Hunger Games too. I love the Hunger Games. Um these are all like things that we see people almost uniting behind because of their adoration for it and just the symbolism that it has as well. I feel like media is such a big part of our culture, and it's also so reflective of our culture during the time in which certain movies are filmed. Like we see specific events happening that were not happening. Well, that may not any longer be happening. I don't know if I butchered that sentence or not. But I think it's something that's like very interesting. Like with COVID, I don't know if a lot of movies made mention of COVID, or maybe at least not that any that I've watched recently. But I know this one show, Superstore, they actually integrated the pandemic into their episodes and into their filming. But I don't really know that many other shows or movies that actually integrated COVID as a part of the, like, filming process, which I feel the reason why, specifically in Western media, was because everybody just wanted to almost feel like they were getting away from the pandemic. I think people just needed that distraction, like, through media, which, again, like, media having media as a form of enrichment is, like, really, like, I feel like it ties back to that so deeply, like, being able to just be able to distract yourself, even if it's, like, temporarily, and actually almost immerse yourself in a world that's separate from yours or a perspective that's different from yours. I think that's something that's really beneficial to people, because I think sometimes if we get too immersed in the mundane nature of everyday life, we sort of lose that spark. I feel like what differentiates, like, human beings from, like, robots in the day is like, our humanity, as well as our capacity to live and exist just to be, and not to serve any particular purpose, or not to fulfill any specific task, to exist just to exist, and to be just to be. I think we kind of get caught up in this idea that if you're not doing something purposeful, you're not doing anything meaningful. Like, if you're not fulfilling a specific task or checking something off your to-do list, you're not doing something with purpose, or you're not doing something with meaning, rather. And I feel like that's something that's so unconsciously ingrained in us, especially in the US with work culture and everything, that we kind of forget that it's okay to just have fun and just relax. Like, of course, not to the point where you become, like, gluttonous in a way, or, like, lazy, but just to actually, like, set that time aside and to have that, I think is so important, because it's like indulging your humanity in a way, or just being able to exist just to be. I feel like we feel the need to assign everything. I feel like we feel the need to be overproductive all the time. And sometimes it's okay to just be able to, like, watch a movie or take a walk in the park and read, just for your sake and just for you to have something to entertain yourself with or ponder. Um but yeah, I think that's my main point with that, specifically with media. And then I also wanted to talk about third spaces and how we kind of see a decrease in third spaces. Well, not a decrease in third spaces, but more so people don't interact in third spaces, like coffee shops, libraries, things of that nature. People are so to themselves post COVID. And I feel like so many things get tied back to COVID, but I feel like at its bottom line, so many things were affected by COVID. And I feel like the lack of interaction in third spaces just does more harm than good for people at the end of the day, because we don't see as much interaction. Like, I know with me, or like in my generation, or maybe it's just me as an individual, but I don't really see, like, a lot of socialization. I mean, I've talked to some of my classmates about it, and even they say that they have a hard time, like, actually, like, meeting new friends, or just, like, being able to, like, connect with other people. It's kind of something that is rare. Maybe it's just the social climate at my school, because I know it's different for some colleges, but I know at least at mine, like, it's kind of rare to see people actively socializing. Like, we have events and things like that, but even with my classmates, I'm not sure whether it's just my major, but with my classmates at least, like, I know that they are always say that, like, when we actually get around to talking about it, like, in class, if we're doing group work or something, that they don't really attend a lot of school activities or things of that nature, or it's hard to make friends on campus just because of the way that our um, social climate is. And I feel like that's reflective of my generation as a whole, just because I have seen so many statistics about Gen Z being super lonely, and I feel like that is something that I have definitely observed, like, in so many people my age, and it's kind of sad, because I feel like what it is just apprehension at the end of the day, because I don't think it's a situation where people want to be mean, like, I don't think it's that. Like, I don't think I've ever associated it with that. I just think there's so much apprehension around socialization, and I think about it, and I don't know why. Like, it really is just the way that we've adapted to be. Because sometimes I think about it in myself, and I'm like, "Why am I so apprehensive to socialize with other people? Like, why am I so apprehensive to actually, like, reach out and, like, break, I guess, that little barrier, for lack of better words? But then when I actually am in an enclosed area with other people and, like, I have to talk to them, like, there's something that prompts me to talk to them, like, I always, like, actually enjoy the conversation. I remember I saw this meme a while ago where it was like, "Oh, when you have a positive interaction with a stranger, and then all of a sudden your faith in humanity is restored." And I remember I thought that was so funny, but it's really true. I feel like a positive interaction with somebody, even if it's something small, it's so beneficial for you, like, and it makes you feel good for the rest of the day. It's something that you actually, like, carry with you. And even if it's just for that singular day, like, it's nice to actually have that pick me up. And I feel like conversely, like, negative interactions, they linger so much more because I feel like sadness and anger are so much more heavy emotions than happiness and peace. I think because of their weight, you carry them with you longer and they pester you longer. So I think like opposingly, like having a negative interaction is like you carry that with you more and it can affect you a lot more, especially if you're already having a bad day or if you've already been going through a rough period. It just exacerbates it by like threefold. And I guess my point with that is just being kind, as like trite as it sounds. I feel like it's really important for people to actually like express like kindness, even if you're not interacting with them. I feel like if you have to interact, like showing that um like kindness and just being cordial with people is extremely important. But um apart from that, I also wanted to talk about, let me refer to my notes, hobbies as well. I honestly, I feel like hobbies are so important, and that comes from somebody who doesn't get the chance to like indulge in their hobbies that much, and I really need to like start. I heard this thing a while ago where it was like our lives are constant cycles of waiting for things to be over, like waiting for the day to be over, waiting for the school day to be over, waiting for Fridays. And like it's rare that we actually like enjoy those moments. But I feel like I also saw something similar where it was like, oh, you wouldn't enjoy the weekends or you wouldn't enjoy your breaks if you didn't have to look forward to them. Like if there wasn't that anticipation and waiting, then you wouldn't look forward to it, or I mean, you wouldn't enjoy it as much, which I think is equally important as well. But where I was going with this is that I think it's important to like actually like enjoy the things that you're doing as you're doing them and always seeing like the benefit in it. And I think it's important to like make time for your hobbies, which I definitely need to work on myself as well. So I can't really speak too much on that, I guess. But I think it's really important to have hobbies, and I've been trying to adopt more hobbies so that I can feel like I have some sort of fulfillment outside of my responsibilities and the things that I do. I've always loved to cook. I suck at baking, but I have been meaning to pick up baking. I tried to bake a cake over my winter break, but my oven doesn't work at my house, and I ended up triggering my carbon monoxide alarm, which was not fun at all. And then I got really discouraged, so I ended up not frosting my cake. And I just left it in the fridge for like a week because I was so put off by that. Because that was the second time my carbon monoxide alarm had gone off in a month because of our oven, which needs to be fixed, honestly. I think me saying that out loud, realizing that it's been twice that it's been triggered is a little alarming, not gonna lie, but I digress. I think it's really important to pick up hobbies, and yeah, I feel like kind of stepping outside of your comfort zone. Like I was saying, I suck at baking, and it's definitely something that I want to get better at. And I've always not been the greatest at drawing. I've always loved writing. I love to write, and I feel as though I've always had pretty decent writing abilities. And I've always loved reading and writing, specifically poetry. I like writing poetry, but I don't really like reading it for some reason. It's a weird, I don't know. I don't know why I'm that way, but I just know that I am. Um, but and then like I was saying, I've never been too great at drawing, and so recently I picked up watercolors so that I could get better at that as well. And I'm not trying to kind of pick up a million and one hobbies so that way I can drop like half of them or something. Like I'm trying to maybe find like one or two new things that I've been interested in and that I kind of want to like work toward. And I think for now I've settled on drawing and baking, specifically baking. And um everything else is something that I've always done in my free time, but sometimes I just don't have the time to. Like writing is something I've done since I was maybe 9 years old. So literally for like a decade now, that's just something that I've done. And that's been my main hobby. And then when I was 12, I decided to learn, well, try to learn French. I recently picked that back up again like last month, and I've actually been doing a few minutes every day on Duolingo, but nonetheless. I've also picked up some French books as well so that I can try to practice my pronunciation and just do little things like that. I think it's so important to like nurture our minds, which like I know can sound corny, but it's really true. I think it's really important. And I think being able to romanticize and see the beauty in everything, like I know it's a trend on like TikTok to like, oh, romanticize your life, but it's so true. Like, you need to view your life as almost like this pursuit of like humanity or like this pursuit of like happiness, like, no pun intended. But yeah, like, I think it's really important to view your life as like some sort of pursuit because I think having something to work towards like having some overarching theme that or thing that you're trying to achieve or like find is so important because even if there are little things that you do just for fun that don't really have a purpose, like I feel like in terms of your life, like you have to assign yourself some sort of purpose in your life. Like of course it's totally perfectly fine to just live and exist without having to find a purpose in every single little task or little thing that you do. Like some things you do just for fun, but I feel like in terms of your life, like the overarching thing, I guess, in your life should be purposeful and that purpose should be personal to you. Like, of course, one person may define their happiness as something completely different than yours, and that's completely okay. But it's so important to romanticize your life and be like, okay, this is what I'm working towards. Like, this is what I want my life to look like in a few years. Like, how can I do this? How can I get there? And of course, it's about enjoying the journey along the way, but I think you need that pursuit. That's what keeps us going as people. Like, you need to feel like your life has meaning. It can't just be because I think when people sort of lose that, I guess, light at the end of the tunnel, they kind of just stop caring and become nihilistic. And maybe some people, maybe that's just my perspective. Like maybe some people can just be to be. Like your purpose doesn't have to be some specific thing like monetary success. Like maybe it can just be enjoying your life, like finding the most joy and deriving the most joy in out of your life that you can and just enjoying the experiences that you have in your life without of course harming yourself or other people. um Maybe that is what your purpose is and that's completely fine, but I think ultimately it's just having something that is going to fulfill you in some way without hurting you or hurting other people is so extremely important. And I think romanticizing our lives in general is also extremely important. Um, And there was this one quote that I also wanted to bring up. I actually like screenshot it. It's from Dead Poet Society. And it goes, medicine, law, business, engineering, though these are noble pursuits and necessary to sustain life. But poetry, beauty, romance, love, these are what we stay alive for. And I think that's so just profound because there's so many different aspects of life. And I think it's so important to have a balance between these noble pursuits as well as what is it, like the more romantic and poetic and yeah, like aspect of life. I think finding that balance is so important because of course you need to sustain life at the end of the day. To keep us going, life needs to be sustained, but you also need something to stay alive for and to indulge and to yearn for. And that's what all of the latter is for. And I think ultimately finding purpose in your life and then also enriching yourself. I think I'm using that word properly. I hope. Um, through like media and hobbies and actually making use of third spaces and fostering community. I think those things are all extremely important. And I hope that some of what I said stuck with you guys before I move on to our um, I'm forgetting the word. Before I move on to our media and science segment, but I hope at least some of that stuck with you. I'm going to now switch over to our science segment. I actually recently went to a research conference for my school, so I was going to talk about that as my science segment because I learned a lot that I thought was very interesting. We I'm trying to think because the way that the conference is set up is that it's sort of like a research fair where you go around and you look at people's posters and they give you a quick spiel about what it is that they looked at or studied. And I learned a lot. One particular study that stuck out to me was this one study from NYU that talked about pregnant mothers and the effect of their stress on their bodies, as well as the effect of their stress on their babies while they're pregnant and also postpartum. And ultimately, to give like a quick synopsis, it's that like the more stressed the mom is, the more stressed baby is, which of course, like that's like something that is very like commonly heard. But I remember, if I remember correctly, that baby will still experience some of that postpartum, and that they also inherit their mother's like nervous system. I remember not hearing this from the girl who presented, but hearing this somewhere else. I think it's that daughters inherit their mother's nervous systems. I could be wrong, but I know that children in some capacity inherit their mom's nervous system, which I thought was really interesting because I remember one of my professors brought up this one book called The Body Keeps Score and how even if you don't consciously remember things, your body will still remember. And I think that's just I don't know, I found it so interesting because I think seeing how connected we are with our moms, like, especially so early in life, which I know, like, may seem kind of redundant to say considering the fact that you were literally growing inside of your mom, but, I think that's so, um I don't know, there's something about it that's just so fascinating to me, and then I remember asking the presenter if she thought that maybe that would have some sort of long-term effect, like the more stressed the mom is, if it had any long-term effects on like the baby as like they grow into adulthood. And she was like, "Oh yeah, like that's definitely like plausible." And I think entertaining that idea is really interesting because she was also talking about how it's really important for moms to take care of themselves and reduce stress when they're pregnant. And that a lot of times it can be like actually having to reduce stress will induce more stress because now you're thinking, "Oh, I have this whole separate human being that I have to take care of." But I remember stressing that it's important to take care of you first, and then that like in that like intrinsically will reach the baby. Like when you're focusing on you being like, okay, how can I calm myself down? Like how can I take care of myself? That that intrinsically will transfer over to the baby because you're taking care of yourself. And as the baby's growing, like they're also being taken care of as well because you guys are sort of functioning as one in a way. But I thought that was really interesting, especially as somebody who wants to go into child psychology and somebody who actually like wants to work with parents. I thought that was very like super like fascinating. I know I said that before, but it is very true. And what else did we discuss or what else did we see at this conference? Um there were a few other studies. I don't know why I'm blinking right now, but that was the main one that stuck out to me. And then, oh, we also discussed, I don't remember what the title was of this one study that I saw, but I thought it was really interesting. But it was something, oh, it was about internal, no, deliberate and what is the word? It was like deliberate and unintentional rumination and its differences on like East Asian, like specifically Chinese students versus like Western students, specifically like students in the US. Um, and what I found really interesting about it was that normally, like Chinese students, like if they do poorly on an exam, what they'll do is they'll deliberately ruminate. So they'll go back and revisit their memories or like revisit the exam to see what it is that they did wrong so that they can fix it. Whereas like US students, it's more so like an unintentional, I think that's the word that she used, rumination, where they like if they like fail an exam, they're like, "Oh, I suck. Like I'm not smart. Like I'm not like equipped for this." Like they internalize it entirely differently. And I remember asking her, well, the presenter, I remember asking her why she thought that was because the first thing that I thought of was issues surrounding self-efficacy and that maybe that had to do something with the way in which children are raised. I feel like largely that has to be cultural as well as the educational culture surrounding, like in these two different parts of the world. And she was telling me that she had always gone to like international school, so she isn't really sure about like schools specifically like in China with only like Chinese students, but that she knows that usually when a student doesn't do well or gets a question wrong, that they're required to go back and fix it and then like show the corrected versions or something like that. Like they actually have to correct their mistakes so that way they can see where they went wrong, and that's required of them every time they like do poorly or get something wrong. Whereas in the US we don't really do that, or at least I don't think I was ever mandated to do that at all as a child. And ironically, like I like to think I have pretty high self-efficacy. The way that I internalize, I mean, I feel like my self-efficacy is sort of mixed, but the point that I want to make before I get into that specifically is that we don't see typically in the US that like students are required to go back and fix their mistakes. Normally it's like you get marked wrong and you get those points off and like you just kind of move on. And I think it's so important to like build self-efficacy for children because I think ultimately like a lot of things that people don't think that they can do, it's not because they genuinely can't do it or it's not in their repertoire. I think it's that a lot of times we don't teach people the steps to achieve their goals. Like normally, like we think of a goal and there's no like step-by-step plan. And people just kind of like dive in head first. And I think that's not really the way to go about things. And I think that's where a lot of people go wrong. And I think that's why a lot of goals can fail sometimes. But I think it's really interesting to see how in China specifically, like they students are like required to actually like fix their mistakes and not think of situations or think of failure as a this is a reflection of my character and my capabilities and my capacity sort of thing, but rather as a opportunity for growth. And I think being raised with like those habits is so extremely important because I think failure is just such a big part of life and it's so it's so inevitable. And I think to kind of demonize it the way that we do in the US is so tragic. And it's like the biggest disservice you can do to yourself because you're gonna fall. Like you're going to fall down. But it's really about how you pick yourself up. And I feel like I have a pretty mixed self-efficacy where sometimes I'll internalize things, but I think that's just my immediate reaction to like failure. But I try my best to turn things around, even if it takes me a while. I try my best to like turn things around because then afterwards, once I've had like time to like sit and think, I'm like, okay, like this is what I need to do. Like this XYZ is what I need to do in order to like get to my goal or to like do better than how I did like my previous like time or this is how I like fix my previous mistakes. And I feel like that's more so like because of the way that I was raised, which of course that's always going to affect your self-efficacy. But I feel like more so that's a reflection of my family more than anything than the educational system. And my point is just that I feel like it's so important for the educational system to actually build self-efficacy in children. I think that is so, so, so important. I honestly feel like our classroom sizes are too big, which is probably not an isolated complaint, honestly. I feel like our classroom sizes are too big, and a lot of the times kids can get left behind because they're not getting the individual attention that they need, and I feel like with small children, that's so important. When you're in college, it's completely different because you're an adult and of course you can handle yourself differently, but with small children, they like need that one-on-one time. They need to so that they can get ahead and that they are equipped with the foundational skills necessary to actually get ahead and to like have a strong foundation so that they can build upon it in their educational life. And even then, even if they decide not to pursue education, it's so important just to have those foundational skills because people need to know how to add. Like people need to know how to divide. Like they need to be able to do that mental math, like as an example. But yeah, I think that's what I wanted to cover for our science section. I'm trying to think if I have any final notes before I move on to our media segment, which I know I spent this whole I spent this whole episode talking about media and I'm gonna go back to media, but I'll approach it from a different way. But I think those are my final thoughts on our science segment. In terms of media, let's see what I have because I want to talk about let's see. I wanted to talk about music I've been listening to, as well as like books I've been reading and like shows I've been watching. I know that's like what we cover pretty much like every week, but I'm trying to think. Not every week, sorry, every month, but I'm trying to think of what I have been listening to lately. Let's see. I feel like I always say the same artist, and it makes me realize how much I circulate the same media over and over and over again, which is kind of funny, but also kind of shows how, like, when I like something, I just like latch on to it. And I kind of treat it as like almost like a safe media, almost like how I sort of like have safe foods where there are like certain things that I eat and then I eat them and then like I know I'll always enjoy them, that sort of thing. It's the same way with media. Like I always rewatch like the same shows and the same movies. Recently I've been listening to a lot of Role Model. I don't know if any of you guys know who he is. He dropped his new album, well, the deluxe version of his last album, Kansas Anymore, and I love it. It's so good. I have it on repeat constantly. It's pretty much the only thing I've been listening to, literally, and I adore every single song on there. Like every time I'm driving, it's the first thing that's coming up. Like my car just already gets the memo. Like I plug my phone in and like next thing I know, one of the songs off that album is playing, which I think is hilarious, but it's true. And let's see. What else have I been listening to? Um, I've been listening to Fleetwood Mac as well. Dreams. And let's see what else because now I'm curious. I'm looking at my Spotify right now to see what it is that I have been listening to lately. I've been listening to some Sabrina Carpenter, as you guys can tell from oh wait, opposite way from my poster. And in terms of shows, I haven't been watching a lot of TV because I don't really get the chance to during the semester. But I have been watching a lot of the OC, which I'm not sure if any of you guys are familiar with that. I mean, it was like such a huge show during like the early 2000s, but it's really good. I think my favorite characters are Ryan and Summer right now. Um, where I'm based off where I'm at in the show, like right now. And let's see, in terms of books, I am still on the picture of Dorian, the portrait of Dorian Gray. Um, I read so slowly during the school year because I have this thing where if I'm reading for class, I get tired of reading so that I'm like, I can't even read for like enjoyment. Like my brain is like, okay, no more reading. So I struggle so hard to finish books during the semester. But then as soon as I'm on break, my brain just craves that like intellectual like stimulation. Like I need to be like satiated, like what is it, intellectually in some way. So I'm like, I have to read, like I have to. Like it's the only way I can like preserve like my sanity, which sounds dramatic, but it's true. Like I just have like such a deep desire to learn. And I feel like that's something that's so specific to who I am as a person. And like I know other people who are like that as well, but I know for me it's something that is very, very true. Like I constantly need to be learning and I constantly need to be like contemplating something or internally picking something apart. Like I've always been that way. And um yeah, and I think I just have always just loved learning. And when I'm not in school, like I have to be learning in some capacity. Like I need to be learning a new language, or I need to be reading a book, or I need to be watching a documentary. Like I need to be doing something. And I guess on a final note, um, I just can't see myself never like not being a student, which is crazy because I know at some point I'll have to stop being a student and actually like work full time, but it's so weird to think that like I won't be able to like be in classes full time like at some point just because I love the classroom setting and I love that I can actually just like go to school and like learn something new every single day and actually like have a conversation about that and just have like someone else like add on and tell me something that they know that I didn't know before. I love to be like intellectually like stimulated and I know that probably sounds a little pretentious, but it's very, very true. And I feel like I've said the word pretentious 1,000 times during today's episode. I'm sorry, but um, yeah, I think I just can't ever imagine myself not being a student or not um, ever like stopping the pursuit of knowledge, which, or at least like the pursuit of knowledge in an academic setting, because I don't think any of us ever stop the pursuit of knowledge if I want to get all existential and philosophical about it. I think life is just a constant cycle of learning. I don't think we ever stop learning. And I think even when you get to the age where you think you know everything, there's always, not always, but there's going to be, or there can be something to completely snag the rug from under you and make you feel like the world is different than what it had than how you've come to understand it. And I think the first time I'd ever read a sentiment like that, relating this back to media, was when I read Love in the Time of Cholera. And I remember, I think it was the doctor, I read it so long ago, I don't remember the names. I think it was a doctor who said who his friend who committed suicide like left a note and he had written something in it and he said and the doctor said something to the tone of and just when I thought I was at the age where I knew everything, here is something that has completely shifted my understanding or like something like that. I think it's like in one of the earlier parts of the book and I remember just thinking that's so interesting because I think it's really rare for people to get like older and be receptive to new ideas because I think a lot of times like people like cling to the comfort of their understanding or the way that they've conceptualized things. And I think straying away from that can feel so uncomfortable, especially when you get to a point where things are finally starting to make sense or finally starting to piece together. And I think from a very young age, I always kind of understood that like there will never be a point where I know everything. Like as much as I know and as much as I grow to know, like there will never be a point where I understand everything. And even my truths like may not be somebody else's truths. The way that I internalize things is not going to be the same way that that other people internalize things. So even the advice that I give can never completely apply to other people. Like I can say, well, this is what happens, or this is what you need to know about X, Y, and Z situation, but that may not be what another person needs to know. But I guess I just wanted to leave off on a note where all the advice that you get, take with a grain of salt. You know your heart. Of course, it's really important to listen to other people and to open your heart and to actually like listen to other people's experiences who've been through similar things that you have been to, because sometimes you can prevent a bad situation if you're receptive to somebody else or somebody else's experience. But I think it's also important in the same breath to take things with a grain of salt, because at the end of the day, you know your heart and you know what is best for you. And I guess I just wanted to wrap this episode up by saying that by saying indulge your hobbies, make a friend, do something nice for someone today, and yeah, read a book, watch a movie, do something for you. Just do something just to exist, just to enjoy your humanity. I don't know. Eat some fruit. Like, yeah, just enjoy life for what it is. Watch the sunset, enjoy the little things like that, because I think sometimes we need to stop and like smell the roses, which is so corny to say, but it is really, really true. I think if we allow the minor things to, I guess, like fly by, we won't really know what we have lost until we no longer have it. Sometimes it's important to just kind of exist and enjoy the fact and that you're alive. I think that's really important because life is a gift. Yeah, thank you guys for watching, and we will see you next month. Bye, everyone.